And I'm going to go ahead and ask for you to introduce yourselves in the order that you appear on the member page on the State Library website for the Network Advisory Committee meetings. So Tracy, I'm going to start with you. You want to introduce yourself?
I thought I would pull that page up because I have to admit I wouldn't know.
Yes. I was going to call on you, but if you can have it posted, that would help.
There you go.
Good.
So this is Tracy with the Montana State Library.
Can everybody see Tracy's page okay?
Any of them that are done.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi everyone, this is Kara, State Library.
Thanks, Kara. This is Jenny Stapp, State Librarian.
This is Cody Allen with Billings Public Library.
Colette Bartow, coming to you from my home, but working at OPI.
Hi all, this is Pamela from Trails.
Hey, Pamela.
Hi, this is Honor from Missoula Public Library.
Hi, Honor.
Hi, Jenny.
Do we have Barry or a proxy for Barry?
Teresa's here, but Barry is not.
Teresa, do you want to introduce yourself?
She's actually lower down on the page. She was being good.
Oh, I see. I see. We have them both. Good.
Yes.
Hi, this is Eva English. I'm Ani Nakota College, presently at home.
Hey, Eva. Do we have Catherine? Might not.
Elizabeth Gonkel, Missoula Public Library, representing MLA.
Elizabeth, thanks for being here.
Catherine is here, Jenny. She just might
Okay.
not. Her mic might not be working.
Looks like she's muted. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well. You said Teresa is here.
Yep, hi everyone.
Hi, Teresa.
And hi, this is Sarah from the State Law Library.
This is Susie McIntyre in my messy bedroom, but representing Great Falls Public Library.
Stacy Moore, Fallon County Library, Small Publics.
Hi, Stacy.
Bruce Newell, the State Library Commission.
This is Kate Peterson. I am a librarian at Helen High School, and I represent large school libraries.
Belinda Potter, and I represent the small academic libraries from MSU Northern.
I'm Dorlyn Rossman. I'm from Montana State University.
Nancy Schmidt, Lower Public Library Federation Coordinator Representative.
Jody Smiley, Medium-Sized Public Libraries Representative.
Very impressive. I think we have everybody and on short notice. So thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us. We have one first action item of the day is approval of the minutes from your March 12th meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Also move, Elizabeth Jonkel.
I'll second then.
Thanks, Susie. Elizabeth.
Susie McIntyre.
Is there any discussion about the minutes, any corrections or additions? If not, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any abstentions? I don't think there's any opposition. So the primary purpose of this meeting is to seek the advice of the Network Advisory Council on how we might best expend our funding that we've received through the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as well as some remaining funds that we have to best help libraries during this. We've received $96,000 through the CARES Act appropriated through IMLS through the Grants to States program. And as you can see in the memo, there's some guidelines for how best to expend those funds. Those principles were set out by IMLS. And then the state library has some remaining LSTA 19 funds, as well as some additional remaining funds in our budget to put towards this effort. So what we are requesting of the Network Advisory Council today is to put forward a recommendation that will go to the commission at a meeting that they are having on Monday afternoon, April 27th. That meeting's at 3 p.m. on Monday afternoon. So this is a pretty quick turnaround. And we're trying to be quick because there are some very immediate needs that we're hoping to address. And the sooner that we can get through procurement processes and get services in the hands of libraries, the better. But we want to make sure that we're doing that work in a way that really maximizes the impact that we can have for libraries. As is spelled out in the memo, the CARES Act funds must be spent by September 30th, 2021. So they're essentially following the timeline of our LSTA 20 funds. And then the state funds, because they are from this fiscal year, at least need to be committed by the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, either through an invoice or a contract that we can accrue against. I wanted to let you all know that while there was some question earlier in the week about whether or not we could spend state monies for the purposes that we're going to discuss today, I have since had a conversation with the governor's budget office to get their sense for the appetite of moving some money around in our budget to help us to support these two initiatives. And so I do feel confident that with the commission's approval, we would have this additional $150,000 to go to support these initiatives that we're talking about today. So I think we are comfortably talking about $290,000 to potentially allocate for these purposes. And then we have put in requests with the governor's office for other state funds that the state is looking at allocating to potentially support some of these initiatives as well. Are there any questions about just the sort of the high level discussion that we're having before we get into the nitty-gritty of the proposals? Or Tracy or Kara, anything else that you would want to share? And I realized as I'm looking at this fine list of attendees that I forgot to ask for introductions from some of our guests. I know we have Jennifer Burnell, Joy Bridwell have also joined us, and there may be others. So before we move on, I want to let you have a chance to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Joy Bridwell. I'm the librarian at Stone Child College, and Eva English has asked me to attend this meeting.
Thanks, Joy.
Yeah.
Jennifer Bruno with the State Library.
Hi, Jennifer. Who else did I miss?
Oh, Pam Henley, consulting librarian from the State Library. And
Jessica
Dan
Edwards
Edwards,
from the
State Library.
Library. Oops.
Hi, this is John Kilgour, State Library.
Anybody else? Again, I apologize.
think we have Evan. Oh, he doesn't have a mic set up at the moment. He introduced himself in chat. And then we have Deb and I think a Marilyn. I'm not sure if you want to introduce yourselves in chat.
Hi, this is Marilyn from the Montana State Library.
This is Deb Mitchell from the Museums Association of Montana.
Hi, Deb. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So as I was saying, are there any questions or discussion looking at sort of a high level at the purpose we're here to meet about today?
This is Bruce. Whose ideas were they, and how did they get promoted to this level?
We have been in discussion with both staff as well as members of the library community about these proposals. The idea for the hotspots developed last winter as we were thinking about potential ways to fund some of the needs that were being identified through the Gigabit Toolkit study that was conducted a little over a year ago. And then the summer reading program initiative is based on feedback that Amelia Kim has received from libraries interested in moving their online summer reading programs online. The proposal related to replacing outdated equipment is based on the need that was identified again through that Gigabit Toolkit report.
Thank you. And I assume that the first proposal for mobile hotspots is within an existing library building?
Those would be used outside of a library building. A library could either place those hotspots in another location or more likely check them out to patrons to use in their homes. And it's based on a model that we've seen in the Lewis and Clark Library where they have hotspots that circulate for a 6-week period of time. It would be up to the library to determine the circulation policies for the hotspots. At this point, I believe 4 libraries in the state have a similar kind of model. And Tracy has since conducted a survey of libraries to get input from libraries about which libraries would be interested in and have the capacity to support this kind of model.
Can you describe, unless this is, we're diving into the weeds too quickly, in which case I can wait, but can you describe which libraries were interested and which libraries weren't interested, please?
Sure. So in the mobile...
Very, very generally.
Yeah. So 53 libraries responded to the survey, and that's not surprising. Some of the libraries are completely closed and their directors are on paid administrative leave. So I would want to follow up with the other remaining approximately 30 libraries that did not respond. Of the 53, 85% of them would be interested in participating. And I had asked them, would they participate if it was completely paid for or if they had to pay a small portion, or are they already circulating? 3 of the respondents are already circulating, and they tend to be the, well, I can take Lewis and Clark, Missoula, and Bitterroot Public, but they would be interested in adding to their collection. It was split pretty evenly amongst those who would participate. So basically there were roughly about 20 libraries that would participate if it was completely paid for, and then about the same who would participate even if they had to pay a small portion. The sizes ranged from small to large, actually. There wasn't really a breakdown. A lot of the libraries were very interested in this because they've kind of discovered through the COVID-19, they have a lot of families who don't have internet access, and this is a way to help those families.
Is your sense that some of the libraries who may not be able to afford to have Montana Library to Go, or a few of the libraries who don't have the shared catalog in their library, would they be interested?
I think so. I could go back in and do an analysis on that point. I didn't look at the data that deeply, but I could do that for you.
Bruce, I want to make sure I understand your question.
I guess, Jenny, I'm very interested in getting resources to dramatically underserved communities.
Your question was about Montana Library to Go and the Montana Shared Catalog.
I was just using those as markers. To say it more directly, those libraries with very, very few resources who are currently not reaching out at all, would they be interested in adding this kind of resource? I'm in the interest of equity, I would really
adding hotspots.
Adding hotspots.
I see. Okay. Tracy, I don't know if you're able to look at the survey data with that kind of information right now, or if that's something we need to go back to.
Kara, do you mind sharing your screen, and then I can go and look up the survey data and get that information for Bruce? I can pop the agenda into the chat so that you have it.
And in heaven, if this is just for Bruce, we can do this later, but
it's a pretty interesting question.
Well,
I think it's fine.
I mean, if we've got this money, and I would like to maybe use this as an opportunity to reach out to some of those libraries who haven't either chosen to or been able to participate in some of the great statewide things we do, and kind of with this sort of welcome them into that fold. That strikes me as exactly the kind of thing that we want to do eventually if we have some resources.
I think it's an interesting idea, Bruce. This is Colette. And that's, I put the comment in the chat that infrastructure provides the avenue for equitable access. So when you have funds with a short lifespan or special funds, I'm remembering back to the days of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Once those funds were gone, those funds were gone. And so if something needs to be created, that's kind of like planting something in a ground so that later on more can be built on it. I think it's really important to think about what needs to be planted in the ground that enhances access to the whole world of things that are possible if you've got whether it's Wi-Fi hotspots or the internal networking and connections that, especially in these times, might be extended out into a parking lot so that those who don't have home access to broadband can at least access or think about coming to the library in a different way and being able to use that Wi-Fi or internet access in the meantime.
I just like to throw out that looking at the hotspots, we do have to be careful that we put it where they can be used. I was really struck that there were some communities that even if we provide them with hotspots, it didn't look like they have the connectivity to make them work. Maybe I was reading it wrong, but
they do require a cellular service. So that's the one limitation on availability with them. And there are certainly areas of the state that lack cellular service.
This also might be an opportunity to work a little bit with some of the co-ops who really knock themselves out to give good service, and this might be right down their alley.
And I know that Suzanne has been reaching out to them as well.
Unfortunately, most of the co-ops no longer offer cellular service. And so there's only, as far as I can tell, and John may have found out something else in dealing, I don't know how much, he tried to reach out, but generally with cellular data, which is what we're talking about, and 4G, LTE, and above, we're talking about the major three, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile at this point.
Known spectacular partners.
Yeah, well, hey, we have what we have to work with.
From a practical standpoint, John Kilgour has done an incredible amount of legwork researching the state's term contracts. The state does have term contracts with each of the mobile providers. And so we'd be able to very quickly procure hotspots and deploy them to libraries. So it's a solution that would not require a significant amount of uptake for libraries to be able to adopt. And then, as I said, there are several libraries that have this kind of service and are willing to share their policies and procedures for how they circulate the hotspots, so that libraries, if they're interested, could quickly model services based on those libraries' existing services. What is proposed here would be hotspots, a couple of hotspots for each library, with a 1-year data plan that's paid for those libraries. And then if a library chose to, they could continue that data plan into the future. And the other point I would make about this idea is that it's one that is very, very scalable. So for example, if we're successful in our request to the governor's office for additional funds, it would simply be a matter of procuring more hotspots and deploying them to libraries so that libraries would have even more to serve. And I think that there are a number of potential funding partners that we could look to as well to try to grow this kind of.
This is Tracy. So this is on the fly, but it was actually 56 libraries that responded. And of those, 9 are non-MSC and all but 1, actually 10 were non-MSC and all but 1 were interested. So 9 of the non-MSC libraries were interested in participating in this project. I am not as good at Montana Library to Go because there are so few libraries left that are not in Montana Library to Go, but I believe the one that was not sure if they wanted to participate in the mobile hotspot program. I don't believe they are in either the Montana Shared Catalog or Montana Library to Go. And then a couple of the non-MSC libraries who are not in Montana Library to Go are interested in participating.
That really helps. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Shared information with you about the total cost, and I'm the first to admit that 2 hotspots per library, it doesn't go very far. For a very small rural community who might need it the most, it might go a little farther. We know that larger urban libraries that serve larger families, families where the parents are working from home and the children are trying to attend school online and might need more Wi-Fi, might also need this kind of service. So one of the questions I think for us to deliberate about is, would this proposal have a kind of meaningful impact that we want to have? One way to think about it is that it can serve as a pilot for libraries to think about potentially growing this kind of program in the future.
I'm not able to switch neatly between screens here and still see the screen. What was the cost per hotspot for a year?
So Kara, if you download the mobile hotspots, perfect.
It's roughly $480 a year. It's roughly $40 a month. There's a slight variation in the cost of the data plans between the three providers. Most of them are providing the hotspots themselves at no cost, and the data plan is around $40 a month.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Doralyn. Forgive me if you've already answered this question. I didn't hear if you did. What's the general reach of a hotspot? Like how far?
Suzanne, do you know the answer to that question?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
My sense that's like a Wi-Fi access point in a house, but with less reach. So you're talking about a relatively small, you're talking about a building or a workspace, but certainly not a neighborhood.
Not a neighborhood, that's right.
Yeah, I think it would be equivalent to, you know, if you've ever used your phone as a hotspot, that it would be a similar kind of range. And I've never tried to do that at any great distance. So, yeah, probably.
So I'm operating on my MiFi, so as to not take the bandwidth from the rest of the people who are working in my house. But the range is maybe 15 to 20 feet without any obstruction, and to have a really solid connection. So I think when we're talking about hotspots, you know, if those are things to be circulated to the individuals who really are without access and need access for, you know, whatever the period of checkout is, I think that makes a lot of sense. But in terms of you know, more back to the infrastructure part, are there ways to boost the systems within a library building, within school buildings or whatever, so that if repeaters are added or whatever infrastructure pieces can be added to strengthen the signal and extend it, you know, into the parking lot. I remember a few years ago when we went up to, was it Cut Bank, Jenny and Evan and Bruce? And that was one of the kind of the hallmarks, is that they left the Wi-Fi on, so that even after the building was closed, people could still pull up into the parking lot, and at whatever hours, if kids needed to do homework late at night or whatever it was, somebody needed to send a business message or whatever, then they had the capacity to do that within a certain amount of range. And to me, that's an investment in infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you do so that you increase access for those who need it the most? But then what do you put in as a foundation that is accessible to all at any time that they potentially need it? So,
I would just, I would just add, we purchased hotspots about 2 months ago or 3 months ago. So I'm not sure the circulation on them at this time, but we were able to send them home with our staff during this period when they needed to work from home for people who don't have internet at home. And they've worked very well for them. I know that I did receive a lot of comments from parents whose children were home during all this time, who don't have internet at home, who would have been happy to be able to check something like that out. By then, we were already away from the library, so it was not possible for us to go back, and I think probably our staff had them all at home because they had to work from home. So I think that there's a real need. We know from research that we did during our campaign for our library that there are 40% of the households in Missoula County that do not have internet and can't get internet. And so that's kind of what provoked us to try these hotspots to see if they worked or not. So I know they work because our staff have taken them home and are able to do the work that they need to do from home while we're not open. So I I don't think that, I think they work totally different than the people that come to our parking lot and use our Wi-Fi in the parking lot. These would be more for parents who have kids who are doing schoolwork and they don't want to drive them to the parking lot and use it or whatever. So I think they're a very viable item for libraries to be checking out to people.
I just wanted to follow up on Colet's comments about boosting the infrastructure in the libraries themselves. And that's part of the thinking behind the recommendation about having funds available for that kind of equipment. Because again, based on the Gigabit Toolkit analysis, we do know that there are libraries that absolutely need to increase and refresh their internal connections and internal equipment.
Bruce, I think, I mean, your question is essential because equal distribution doesn't mean equitable access or increasing access where the gap exists. And so I think that this excellent information that Tracy's put together can, I think, potentially demonstrates where the greatest needs are. And with that good data, I think it's easy to justify a decision that puts the resources where they are, meet the greatest need.
This is a suggestion. Instead of sending 2 per community, we would make more of a difference by sending lots to 1 community. Just for discussion, what if we flooded those communities with the greatest need?
And this is Tracy, and Jenny had me and Suzanne helped look up the percent broadband access for counties, which is the 5th column over in the spreadsheet. And she and I had talked about, should we actually send more hotspots? Like, for instance, if you look at Bridger Public Library and Carbon, 37.2%. So should we send more to the Bridger Public Library? And I would be totally interested in hearing what the NAC thinks of that idea. We chose not to go down that way because I think formula-wise we weren't really sure how best to do it and to do it so equitably. And we do have that challenge of, some libraries aren't interested. I believe the Bridger Library is actually one of the ones that is interested. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if you would like us to tackle it that way.
Well,
This is Susie, and that math might be kind of hard, because if there's a county that has 37%, but there's only 1,000 people in that county, then we're impacting how many people. Whereas if Missoula County has 40% and there's thousands of people in that county, I mean, the math gets really complicated when we start doing that, because it would almost have to be done on a per capita basis.
And then
not that I'm opposed to, yeah.
The other complexity is that the availability of broadband does not equal the affordability of broadband. And I would scratch my head about how to factor that need into the equation. We're talking about people who may have recently lost their jobs and may have to turn off their broadband as one of the first things they choose to cut.
I'm sorry.
So many ways. There's so many ways to slice and dice need.
To a certain extent, this project would be a demonstration project. And again, I'm not actually suggesting anything right now. I'm just thinking out loud, and I'm enjoying the discussion. But perhaps just sending 2 hotspots to a community, might or might not make much of a difference because it's just 2. But if you sent well, just to exaggerate to make the point, if you send 100 access points to a community of 1,000, that would make a difference. And whether that difference was a valuable difference or not, in terms of this project as a demonstration project, would be interesting. I'm not proposing 100, but I'm just thinking maybe there is an argument for giving a few libraries what they need and then stepping back and see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it seems interesting that we're really having a difficult time talking about what this need is. Like, what does it actually mean? Because if it's just brute numbers, which is that we want them to get used, like we would do it differently than which I think what we actually want is right to make people's lives better, right? To help them get things done. And sure, I mean, so that's a difficult thing, which is we have all these numbers. We have there's no one stat that's going to tell us that, though, right? I mean, knowing that Bridger has 37% coverage doesn't tell us if the people there actually need more of this than the people in other counties. So I don't know if it's a matter, I mean, it might be a matter of, can we get libraries to kind of survey their communities and give us a good idea? But yeah, I mean, I think generally the idea of sending more to places where we know there's a bigger need strikes me as like intuitively the right way to go. Because at the same time, I mean, if we do that, they'll most likely get used, which is what we want. But yeah, I mean, these questions of how do we help people in need? Well, we need them to know, first of all, that we have them, right? I mean, a lot of these people may not come to the library at all, but they would if they knew that they could have hotspots. But yeah, it's a question. I mean, these numbers are not doing a lot for us when it's talking about like these kind of individual needs that we're trying to get at.
I like the idea of triangulating data, and what I would suggest that I kind of haphazardly put in the chat is schools have a really good idea, particularly in small, medium-sized communities, maybe not quite as accurately in the largest communities, but schools know which kids have dropped off the map and which kids haven't. The schools know who they're able to reach with online delivered remote learning. And they also know in those communities, because of the lack of access to internet services, that they've had to rely on paper packets to serve individual students in those communities. So I think there's an opportunity for schools and libraries to collaborate. And I think students are a great way to even inform parents and small business owners, because everybody's home with their kids, everybody's got their own homeschool going. If those proprietors of businesses and parents also see that there's an opportunity that the library is extending to help support them during this time, that might be something to think about as well.
I agree with you, Kole. This is Hanor. And I also think that, we might be providing hotspots, but then do they actually have something to use with that hotspot? When I was talking with our Frenchtown librarian, Frenchtown was taking packets to the students because the students do not have computers at home. And so it's not just hotspots they don't have, but they don't have the technology to use with them either. So the school knew who needed to have paper packets and who had the ability to be able to use technology.
Let's see, keep up with the chat just a little bit. To answer Belinda's question is about how it's paid for. We're discussing the plan would be that the state library would cover the full cost of each hotspot for 1 year. So the hotspots, the device itself is free, and then we would pay for a 1 year data plan.
Bruce also had a suggestion of, we buy them and we have them at the state library and we circulate them to libraries by request. The fear I have with that, Bruce, is some patrons are really, really, really savvy about placing holds, and others are not. And I think actually when you look at adoption rates and so forth, the ones who are not savvy are really the ones we're trying to serve. That's my kind of concern with that. Well, that and the logistics of getting the hotspots to the different places. I see. Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
I'd like to get a little bit more sense of the group about this idea of trying to have sort of a minimum foundation of hotspots for each library versus finding a way to identify need in some way that's meaningful and making a more targeted procurement for those libraries.
This is Susie, and I guess I think this discussion is really good, and if we could use that school data, but I think we have to cross-tab it with the ability of the libraries to circulate it. Are libraries open? Do they, and what's going to happen if somebody steals it, and are people willing to take that on? So I like the need idea, but we also have to make sure people have the capacity and the willingness to do it.
This says that she thinks a more targeted approach would be effective. Colette, how readily available is school need data?
Like in terms of a data set,
Yeah.
Not really a data set. Just it really is individual communities making a connection. Certainly some of the information about students and their circumstances are protected under FERPA and all of that. But
I'm just thinking about, we're
in,
trying to triangulate data.
Yeah.
Need a data set.
Yeah. And so I think, with each of the schools needing to submit a plan, a month ago to the governor to be approved for their delivery of remote learning. Kirk Miller at the School Administrators of Montana did a survey of districts that allowed him to collect some of that information. The OPI is not in that space at all in terms of managing or being part of the approval or collecting of local plans under the COVID-19 emergency. So I would recommend reaching out to Kirk Miller actually, because with the outreach that he did, they did a survey and they do have a data set. I think that might tease out some of that at a higher level, and certainly going directly to the school administrators with Kirk's partnership is a really good direct route to go. Unless you're sitting in Absaroka or wherever, or Bridger, and you happen to see the superintendent of schools walking down the street and just say, hey, here's this idea I want to bounce off of you, and get boots on the ground faster that way. I think that would be great, but Kirk would be the good source for data, I think.
Just a few more comments in the chat. Suzanne said for those libraries that are lending them, if the device is stolen, the service is cut, the device then becomes useless. I assume we could just then replace it with a new device with the new plan.
Actually, they tend to show back up at the library because they're pretty useless without data.
Yeah. Jody says that we would be able to loan them to other libraries similar to what we do with books. Libraries are amazing at sharing what they do not use, so I think it's possible we would be more than happy to share. That's actually a great suggestion, Jody. It would probably be a lot more efficient than the state library trying to do something like that. There's a question, does OPI anticipate receiving any funding to support connectivity for learning?
Good question, Kara. So with the CARES Act funds that are earmarked for schools that are, my understanding was that some of those monies were hitting the coffers today or by tomorrow, but certainly anything when it comes to networking devices, those sorts of things, there is more flexibility than there normally would be with federal education funds for buying those things, because the ultimate goal is to have the infrastructure and the technology and the content in place, as well as professional development to help put us in a better place when this scenario plays out again in future times. So the answer is yes. And there's also, the flexibility that the FCC put out for the use of E-rate funds as well. So I think there's going to be a flood of money through the CARES Act and flexibility with state dollars as well, as Jenny, you described with the state libraries general fund dollars. And then there's the governor's discretionary funds that he's receiving too, about 8 million of which are earmarked for schools. So there's going to be plenty of money, but people need to have really concrete ideas about how that investment can be best used to put the things in the ground that need to be there when we're not doing so well above the ground.
Belinda wanted to know if the state library does the contract for internet services for public libraries. We do not, Belinda. But in this case, we would use the state's term contracts to procure the individual hotspots, and essentially they'd be donated to the libraries. The data plan would expire after a year, and it would be up to the libraries to decide if they would want to continue that service or not.
Hey, this is Cody again. Would it be helpful if we just, I guess, aggregate the data a little bit? I mean, we can either look at pure broadband access, right? So, if I look through this really quickly, it seems like you could just kind of wantonly pick 40% access. Anything below that would be like a place to start looking closely at, for example. But then what if we can like compare that with the coverage and the population, at least to start like getting a good sense of which places have like low population, low access, and like bad coverage. That might be like a place to start with, like, these are probably the places that need it more than the other places.
Any thoughts about Cody's response? Cody's suggestions?
So yeah, and that was just kind of like outside of trying to collect more data, just given what we have, that's maybe something to start. I don't know.
And Deb Mitchell says, I think community museums would be a great second choice for the hotspot areas. Understand the needed schools, but small rural museums are in need of this also. And I wanted to, Bruce posed the question, do libraries have a role in providing access outside the library to individuals? If so, perhaps a community WAN would be more effective.
I'm wondering if maybe instead of trying to figure out the details, maybe the NAC should just say, we are wanting you to get the biggest bang for your buck, and we would like the state library staff to explore these different models. And because I don't know, without us crunching the numbers, and I think it's going to be hard for us to come up with the very best method in the short amount of time that we are all meeting as a group.
Except I think this group is probably as well positioned as any group in Montana for saying what does give us our biggest bang for their buck.
I think if you wanted to do that, what would be helpful for us at the State Library to know is, like, how much of the 290,000 would you want us to put towards the mobile hotspots? And guidance on, would you like us to do the targeted versus just the spread it out amongst all of the libraries? I think we would need to know that. And we could go crunch that data, you know, maybe using Cody's suggestion, and then the suggestion that we've had is 1 device per 1,000 people. So we could kind of combine all of those together and try to get that data for you.
I wouldn't be able to vote on this until I understood if this is something we really should be doing. I truly don't know.
I think it's absolutely something that we should be doing for any number of reasons. It provides patrons access to library services, first and foremost, those patrons who wouldn't otherwise have access to them. It's a way of extending 21st century library services, the infrastructure that's necessary for our citizens to participate in what it means to be a 21st century citizen. When you talk about information sufficient under people's needs, as this situation so readily demonstrates, we cannot be citizens in this world without broadband access. And
I wouldn't argue with that, Jenny, but just to extend the argument and to see if your point still holds, why wouldn't we do something that was more effective and much cheaper in terms of by person access, and put in a community-wide wide area network and just have it a free public network?
I'm not sure how you think that's cheaper. And then you get into all sorts of community broadband rules and regulations that would get us crossways with telecommunication providers and the legislature.
Doubtless, but it's kind of like offering books free to people and letting them sort of check them out. That gets us in crosswise with booksellers. I'm not questioning the value of this. I'm just wondering, if we really want to do it, is this the most effective way? And I'm not sure much of decision making is deciding what not to do. And with such great needs for content and such great need for services, do we want to jump off the end of the access dock? That is really a question for me.
So Jody says, I agree with Jenny. When we were shut down, many of our patrons could not fill out their unemployment forms because they had no internet access. I had to fight the commissioners to let me open the lobby so people could make appointments to use one computer. It was being used all day. And then a couple of NAC members have weighed in and said that they vote for targeted support. And Kate has said, I support including mobile hotspots as a priority with these funds. and think that targeting by need is the best approach.
I also agree with targeting because each librarian knows their community and knows whether they'll be able to circulate them or not. And if we target and they're not being circulated someplace, they can be moved to a different library. It doesn't mean that they have to stay wherever they go to begin with if there's no use. I do think that there's a great amount of need out there, especially right now and through the end of the school year. I think there's a lot of parents who are just flailing for answers.
And Bruce, one of the things
I wanted to just answer Bruce a little bit too about the wide area network. In addition to the complexity of trying to set one up, like Jenny was saying, I think that also would be limited just to the communities themselves by necessity. And that doesn't include any of the rural, more rural areas, which granted, it's a little suspect to me how well they're currently served by data, by the cellular providers, but at least it's a shot at getting some services to them as well, to the people who don't live in towns.
Yeah, it's a big meal we need to digest, and we can't get it all in one bite. But I take your point.
And then, Cole, Kate had a question for you. She's just wondering if you could better define what you mean by infrastructure. Okay. Thanks, Cole.
So I want to get a sense of what a targeted model could look like. Just thinking through some of that. So to be clear, probably a lot of libraries wouldn't get hotspots. Is that something that's agreeable? I shouldn't say wouldn't get hotspots, at least initially. I very much appreciate what Jody and Norm have said about libraries then sharing those hotspots where they're most needed. But is the sense of the NAC that you're comfortable with a model or with a recommendation where a number of libraries would not receive something, at least initially?
My sense is if we had a program that was focused on picking a number out of the air 10 libraries, and we were going to make a big difference in those 10 communities, then that would be great. The other 72 library communities wouldn't get any hotspots now, but we would have a much better idea a year from now how the program had worked and whether this was something that we wanted to continue. Again, I from a policy point of view, this is something kind of new. Not bad, just new.
So when we think about then how we would pick those targeted areas, I want to get a sense of the kinds of data points that we could consider. I realize we're at the top of the hour, so some of you might need to drop off, and I appreciate your time today. We have the data about broadband access. I can certainly reach out to Kirk Miller and ask him what kinds of data he has available for schools. I think we'd be challenged from a capacity perspective to try to go school by school to kind of get that kind of information. But to the extent that Kirk has information we could use, there's also demographic information, both population as well as income, and then potentially looking at unemployment claims. Those are all data points that we could potentially bring to bear, and honestly I have no idea the extent to which we could coordinate that at this point. Is that the kind of information that you're thinking about? Am I over making this overly complex?
No, I do think too, I put in the chat that Education Superhighway with the data set that they have on schools would be helpful as well. But as I was reading through Eva's comment, you know, that in her community, people don't need Wi-Fi hotspots. They have their phones, but they need a computer. So to me, I mean, it really points out that each community has its own challenges and needs, and each community is potentially the best source of information about what those particular needs are. And maybe what they need is money and the ability to access funds for specific needs that they've identified. And I'm just talking out loud, but you know, a direct grant process that would distribute funds might be another approach to think about too, rather than purchasing stuff. But like I said, that's just what kind of popped into my mind. You know, how do you meet individual community needs? We can have good data to surface where are the communities that may have the greatest need based on access to broadband or socioeconomic factors. But at the end of the day, if you know, there's no way to cookie cutter approach, I think, that isn't going to necessarily maximize the funds that are available to put to the problem.
I do know that MLA has gone through the process of requesting funds through the governor's office, and what they are requesting would be a direct payment to libraries. You've suggested that if the governor chooses to prioritize funds for libraries, that we could use the state aid model as a way to suggest distributing those funds. Bruce suggested free school lunches as a metric. That's I think a really good measure. It's a measure that's used for the E-rate funds. So that would be something that would be pretty readily accessible as a data set to evaluate. The timeline, the funds are available now. The federal funds need to be spent by September of 2021. The state monies need to be committed by the end of June. But of course, we're in this experience right now, so the sooner the better.
This is Deb with the Museums Association of Montana, and I just wanna put a word in for museums also. Museums are a big part of the community. They're used for gatherings. They're used for a lot of lectures. Are used for a lot of different things. So the hotspot opportunity would be very beneficial within a museum setting also. And I just want to point that out to you know, let you know that they kind of need to be in the thought process of this also.
Thank you, Deb. We haven't had a chance to talk about the summer reading online programs. I'm hearing support for the idea of allocating some funds for replacing broadband and Wi-Fi routers. Does anybody want to, well, let's talk about the summer reading options, and then we can talk about how we might make some decisions. And I don't know if Amelia's with us, Tracy.
No, she's not, but I can talk about this one if you'd like.
Please.
So Amelia was approached by about 20 libraries who, when I think a little bit prior to COVID-19, but especially when the COVID-19 crises hit, realized that they were probably going to have to shift some of their summer reading stuff online. And so the two products that are on the support spreadsheet, Beanstack and Read Squared, are kind of the two products that we're being seen actually used by other states around the nation. Bean Squared is truthfully probably not an option for us. It is, we needed to get into their pool probably mid-April. So we're really most likely looking at Read Squared. However, our peers around the nation have suggested that Read Squared is a good choice. It's not as jazzy as Bean Squared, but it's a nice product. So I know for Amelia, it's pretty critical that she knows right away whether or not we could provide funding to help libraries who are interested. And so that's what she has listed out here. The 20 libraries are the ones that she mentioned specifically, but then we also just kind of did a pricing estimate for more libraries. It's highly unlikely that all 82 libraries would want to participate because not all libraries actually offer summer reading programs. I do not know off the top of my head how many do not. The majority do offer something. And so at the end of this spreadsheet, she kind of talks about what the different products can do.
I'll jump in here. I actually have to leave here in a second too, but we use Read Squared at Billings, and it's actually very nice and pretty easy to use. And we're going to be, I think we're doing 6 concurrent programs this summer, the way things have kind of fallen out. But Read Squared is really easy. It's really good as far as customer service goes. They work with us a ton. But also it's really easy for libraries who haven't done it before. They can just kind of use the stock settings or the stock program. They don't really have to do a ton of their own ground up work, which is really nice. So of the two, in talking with Kathy and some of the other administrators, I mean, we feel like Read Squared was the much better option of the two. So that's kind of where we were thinking. But I have to run, so I will see you all later. Thanks, though.
Thank you, Cody. So perhaps I could suggest to the NAC that maybe what would be useful, because I'm sure as we start to get closer to the half hour, an hour, more of you will need to hop off. What would be helpful is to know, would you like us to allocate funding perhaps to these other projects, the summer reading, the replacing old broadband Wi-Fi routers, and or put any money towards Montana Library to Go, and then whatever's left, would you like us to do the mobile hotspots? Perhaps that would be a good way to do this. Yeah.
That's what I was going to suggest, Tracy, as well.
So I think what I would need to know on this one with the summer reading is, would you like to fund it, and do you want to fund it at the cost only for the 20 libraries that have expressed interest, or would you like us to fund it at a little bit higher level? 40 libraries would be approximately half the state.
And I would want to just jump in and say we would maximize our investment if we had a 2-year contract, and this is somewhere where we could pay for 2 summers worth of the summer reading program with the LSTA funds, and that would expend them out by the September 30th, 2021 deadline. So we could potentially think about doing, more like 40 libraries the first year and funding for, up to 75 libraries the second year, something like that. But I think we would maximize our investment and create more opportunity if we thought about it as a 2-year investment rather than just one summer's investment. So that would be, if we were going with the Reed Squared, that would be roughly between $40,000 and $50,000 for 2 years.
This is Susie, and Great Falls Public Library is really interested in this. We just, I think that we have to think of new ways of doing summer reading, because we're not going to be able to have tons of kids coming in, and I think a lot of people have smart devices, and so I am very much in favor of doing this for the 2-year investment.
For the commission, you're going to have to explain to us what this tool even does.
This is when I wish Cody were here, or Amelia, because she would be able to better explain.
Well, if Susie says it's a good thing, then that pretty much sells me, but I would like to know what this thing is.
Yeah, it's a summer reading app that allows you to track what you've read. Go ahead, Susie.
I was just going to say, I'm saying it's good because my IT person and my 2 youth people demoed it and said that it was great and that it would work for them.
Thanks, Kara. Yeah, I'm kind of guilty, Bruce, of doing the same thing. I sort of entrust Amelia and all the youth services librarians. So I think we have a proposal on the table, Jenny, by a couple of, Catherine Holt, that sounds like an actual motion. Fund 40 libraries for 2 years and track data regarding use. And Eva said that she agrees. So would you like to maybe have it where we just ask the NAC to vote on each proposal and then go from there? Or?
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
I wonder if, and I don't know how to do this as a chair, but if Catherine would be open to the idea of, I think, and maybe Eva says this, more the second year if it's successful. I think one of the challenges with that is that we're going to be asked to sign a 2-year contract now. So we need to think about how we could scale that 2-year contract now. So it's not ideal. Ideally, we'd have time to evaluate what that success looks like in a first year before entering into a contract for the second year. But we could potentially have to give some thought about how to do that.
So, Catherine, would you be willing to make a motion to? So Belinda asked a question about, do you have to name the libraries in the contract? Or could you choose to take a library spot out and give it to another later? Let me look at the spreadsheet. I
don't think we would in the actual language of the contract. The contract itself could be flexible. Typically, when we see those kinds of contracts, we have an appendix that names the participating libraries, and the contract language can be flexible enough to allow us to add or remove a library depending on whether or not they moved forward with something.
And then Catherine asked age levels on Reed Squared. It says programs for all ages and reading levels.
it would be swell if we had some sort of a representational group of children youth services librarians give us sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down, or sort of a meh.
I can tell you that Amelia's been begging for this on behalf of libraries for about 3 weeks.
She has. You know, it's so funny. Their website is just slick and beautiful, but it doesn't always give you all of the information. It's just saying all ages and reading levels. It doesn't say specifically, 0 to high school. That's a really good question. Let me just see if Amelia's around, and I could ask her real quick.
My sense from talking to our my youth services librarian was that she thought that it did have some potential for us trying to reach our teens and tweens, which typically don't participate in summer reading so much because teens and tweens are so much online. So I'm pretty sure it goes fairly high in age.
I sent a message to Amelia. And to answer your question, it can be used all year, not just in the summer, Catherine. So no, the service would not be limited to the summer. So this is from Catherine. Are books available via the site? It does say that it has curated book recommendations from your catalog based on patron likes and interests. So it connects the app to your catalog. And if you have more to add, Susie, that'd be great.
I don't have a ton more to add. We are trying to, we have little free libraries in every neighborhood, and so one of our plans is to try to make sure that we're getting kids books in all those little free libraries over the summer, and if people can't make it to the library, but pushing our online books and books freely available in the community.
And to answer your other question, Catherine, I believe you can connect it to Montana Library to Go. That was just a quick internet search, but that was what it looks like other libraries have been able to do. I just used Overdrive.
Well, I guess I will, in the interest of time, I guess I will make a motion that the NAC support the purchase of the funding of Read Squared for 40 libraries for 2 years.
I'll second the motion. This is Honor. Oh, Catherine already did through the chat.
All right. Thanks, Susie and Catherine.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? I'm sorry, was that a question? Hearing none, all in favor of recommending a contract for 2 years for up to 40 libraries, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
This is Bruce. I abstain.
Okay. We've had a bit of discussion now about improving infrastructure in libraries, specifically replacing old broadband Wi-Fi routers. And we've provided some analysis based on the Gigabit Toolkit report about routers that are older than 5 years old and those libraries reporting unreliable Wi-Fi. And staff are recommending that we allocate $10,000 to procure upgrades to that hardware. Is there any questions about this recommendation? Would someone be interested in making a motion to approve this recommendation or not?
Looks like we have texted motion and second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? With the two recommendations remaining, the hotspots and Montana Library to Go, again, these are both options where we could put any or all available funds to either of them. We typically, at the end of year, have put any end of year funds into Montana Library to Go. And so one option would be for you to recommend that we put some additional funds into Montana Library to Go at this time. I think that might be a little bit easier route to go than determining a specific amount of funding for the mobile hotspots. But you could also, if you're interested in the mobile hotspot idea, determine an amount of funds to allocate for that, with remaining funds going to the Montana Library to Go. There's a suggestion from Stacy that we give to Montana Library to Go in children's content, and Catherine says she totally agrees.
I'm loath to disagree with doing children's funds, but statistically, the kids stuff checks out at a much lower rate. I know we get complaints that we don't have enough kids stuff, but when we allocate the funds, we tend to have a higher percentage of funds allocated to kids stuff than the percentage of checkout. I can run those numbers for people if they want.
Seems to me we have a group of librarians who are sort of coordinating this, including Susie, and I would like them to kind of set the collection development policy on that.
It could be that we're just choosing the wrong stuff. So maybe if we did put more money into it, we'd get kids to check out more, but the stats don't really support that.
We get a lot of comments from parents that they wish there was more content, but I, again, don't know how many would check kids' content out because I don't know if they have the means to be able to check it out. And so if the statistics have proven that it doesn't check out, it would be silly to place more funds in that area. But on the other hand, maybe during the time while libraries are closed, more of it would check out. I'm not sure.
The statistics are available online and quite easy to read. And it looks to me like usage is fairly flat.
Yeah, I think it should be up to the committee. They know, they keep close attention to what circulates and what doesn't.
So if we've, out of the 290,000 available, we've allocated the 10,000 for upgrading the hardware and about 24,000 for the summer reading program, which leaves about 256,000. Again, do you think it makes the most sense to dedicate an amount of funding for Montana Library to Go, or would you rather dedicate an amount of funding to the hotspots, knowing that whatever remains could potentially be put to the other option?
How many libraries, how many public libraries are not members of Montana Library to Go?
I believe there are 5. We have just added Hot Springs, extended an invitation to the non-Montana Library to Go members to join, and they were the ones who responded so far. So all but 5 at this time.
If we were to add money to the Montana Library to Go fund, is there a way of simultaneously extending it to any library that wished to be a partner? And could we do that in such a way that there wouldn't be a financial obligation for those libraries coming in for the first year? And Susie and others, Kara, does that make sense, or is that just a dumb idea?
Are you asking if we would be able to subsidize bringing libraries on?
Yes, and is that a good idea?
Well, I think it would be great to have all the libraries be members. They have to understand that there would be an obligation in fiscal years going forward, and they would have to be able to support that. So in the short term, it would not be expensive, but it is also an obligation on their end that they would have to agree to, which essentially I had explained to Hot Springs is joining, and they've decided that is something they want to commit to in future years. So that's, from my perspective, that's...
The other issue is that, like, their staff would have to be trained. They'd have to, be willing to do the marketing to their community and all of that. So just letting people in without the libraries expressing interest, I don't know how effective that would be. I mean, if they're interested and they just need money, that's one thing, but.
So there has been some chat about Jenny's question for the NAC. Should we allocate a certain amount to Montana Library to Go or to the mobile hotspots? Kate said it seems to make sense to me that we should allocate a certain amount to the mobile hotspots, and then the remainder would go towards Montana Library to Go content. And Catherine agreed with Kate, and so did Jody. And then Belinda asked, do most patrons have a device to use with the hotspot? Just curious, and I think we don't know for sure, Belinda. The Lewis and Clark Library is our best experience because they've had the program for the longest time. The hotspots are always checked out, and the patrons have devices. I think probably old laptops or phones or iPads as well, but we don't know. And then Catherine Holt, I am thinking the hotspots should be tried with select criteria for choosing libraries while tracking data on successful usage, etc.
Do you have a sense of how much you would want to allocate for the mobile hotspot program, as is shown in the memo? The two hotspot per library, the maximum we were thinking was around $77,000. As I just said, we've allocated or we still have to allocate around 256,000. So there's a significant amount of money that you could potentially recommend. Just kind of off the top of my head, we could put 56,000 to Montana Library to Go and 200,000 to a hotspot program. If you were to do something like that, you could potentially still do the 2 hotspots per library and do a more targeted model as well, to really maximize how we would look at showing impact. Heather said she'd like to keep the hotspot vote separate from the Montana Library to Go vote if possible.
What would you like to propose a motion, Bruce?
No. Well, no.
It's fine. It's a hard one.
I really am. I am unprepared to vote on the idea of the hotspots. I for the reasons I've said. I wouldn't want to get in anyone else's way if they thought that was a great idea, and that would be interesting information for me, useful information. I do know that the Montana Library to Go is as Jenny said, is sort of it's like shining a flashlight out into space. We could just throw money at it willy-nilly and still not have enough books. I am a little uneasy with the shut-in period, the shelter-in-place period that we've been living through. The stats for that are flat, and maybe I'm just not seeing the right stats or the right period of time, but that does concern me.
Are you talking about the stats for Montana Library to Go?
Yes, that's correct.
I think we probably need to get you better stats.
Yeah, it's total opposite.
Okay.
Yeah, they're up.
I mean, if I were to make a motion, which I am not, I would vote that we allocate money for Montana Library to Go, and maybe not the full 200 and whatever it is, and think more carefully about this access idea. It strikes me, I mean, giving people access strikes me as a good idea, but I am not sure the state library has the capacity to take on this entirely new role. Given the fact, for instance, we don't have enough money to help libraries with everyone being members of shared catalog, or everyone having Montana Library to Go, or some of the other kinds of things that we know are valued. So that's why I don't want to make a motion, because I am really uneasy with the access idea. But I just love Montana Library to Go, particularly if I'm not looking at the right stats, and stats have been going through the ceiling. Then by all means, let's give them money.
Bruce, this is Kara. The stats that I have, which are not comprehensive, and it is probably too soon to know completely what the impact of the closures would be on the stats, but in March, our holds increased by 22%, which is an unusual spike. We did receive about $8,000 in donations from participating libraries, and purchased, I believe, an additional 300. I would look to Susie, that's accurate. We purchased about 300 titles in March.
Kara, is it true that circulation, though, stayed fairly flat?
Ebook circulation increased by about 12% by my figures. Audiobooks, I don't think they actually increased quite as much.
My sense with that collection is that it is, the shelves are so underfilled that we really don't see the true use, because it gets hammered and patrons aren't able to really indicate what their true use of that collection would be. Anyhow, I think we need a motion that we can either vote yea or nay or abstain.
Linda asked a question, she was asking, are we like obligated to continue to put that additional money into Montana Library to Go? And the answer is no. It's like a purchase.
Okay, I'll make a motion for what it's worth, that we put a certain amount of money into hotspots so that it can be a demonstration project, and then the remainder of the money would go into Montana Library to Go. I have no idea what that certain amount of money should be. So if somebody wants to help fill that in, it'd be great.
Well, Jenny had suggested 200,000 for mobile hotspots, and did you say 56,000, Jenny, for Montana Library to Go?
I did.
Okay.
And Kara shared in the chat the total content budget for Montana Library to Go annually is approximately 250,000 a year.
Is it the understanding with the hotspots that we would do a targeted approach, not 2 hotspots per library?
Well, I think we should do a targeted approach, and then if they're not checking out in those libraries, they can be shared with somebody that will check them out.
And are you saying two hotspots per library and then let them be shared if it's not working out?
No, I think a targeted approach, and then if they're not working out in those libraries, other people can borrow them. And the reason I say that is we started ours with 2 in each library just to see how they would circulate. And if they're not circulating in our branches, then we won't put any more there. And if they're circulating in our branches, we'll buy more for there. So I think that targeted is good if we know that those places need the hotspots. And then if they don't, they can let the rest of the libraries know, and people can borrow them.
So Eva suggested I think she's not saying 2 per library. What I think she's saying is use the 77,000 as where we would start. And Jody said she agreed. And then Susie, did you want to weigh in?
Well, I was just gonna split the baby in the middle. Could we do like 160,000 to hotspots, half going to 2 hotspots per library, which would do, basically that, and the other half going to a targeted approach? That way nobody will feel left out.
And then I think you could still, for those libraries that found that they weren't circulating, could still share them.
Yeah.
It looks like there's some support for Susie's idea.
Let's hear a motion.
I move that the Network Advisory Council fund $160,000 for hotspots to be spent providing 2 hotspots per library, and then the remainder to be used in a targeted approach designed by Montana State Library staff to get hotspots to the most libraries in most need.
there a second to Susie's motion?
Somebody else can make another motion.
Jody, there's a second from Jody. There's a question from Belinda. Can some of the money be put to marketing for hotspots and Montana Library to Go? We'd have to use
I think each
state
library
dollars.
should, yeah, I think each library should do their own marketing, and we shouldn't waste the money for marketing, because when we do that, some places never even use it. It just sits. So I just feel like we should be able to market things ourselves.
There are limits on the federal funds to do marketing with our federal funds. Is there other discussion on the motion? Again, the motion is $160,000 for the hotspot idea, funding 2 hotspots per library, with the remaining funds, approximately $80,000, to be a more targeted demonstration project. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? There's a nay from Eva.
Nay from Bruce.
A nay from Catherine. Any abstentions? Elizabeth abstains. With 3 nays and 1 abstention, the motion carries. So then that leaves math. About 96,000 for content for Montana Library to Go. Is it the sense of the group that that balance should go to Montana Library to Go to be allocated by the Montana Library to Go Collection Development Committee?
I so move.
Bruce is moved. Is there a second from Eva? Any discussion? It's approximately 96,000. Yes, Elizabeth. Any further discussion?
I just have one question. Are we going to put a limit on when that has to be spent? Just as a member of the selection team, I'm thrilled and terrified because that's a lot of money to spend that quickly. So will it be okay if we spread that out over?
Yeah, if this question is for you and Kara both. I think if we could get an invoice from Overdrive, then we could accrue that money. Kara, is that right?
We can. Yes, we can. Yeah.
And then I don't know what their process is.
I do like the idea of accruing it, or basically promising the money to the program with all deliberate speed, because now's the time people need that content, and being able to say, well, hang on to your hats because more is on its way would be a really good thing for libraries to say.
Absolutely. We just can't spend it in 3 weeks or whatever. Yeah.
Any further discussion?
Just to say again to Susie and to the members of the committee, thank you so much.
Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of applying the remaining funds, approximately $96,000 to Montana Library to Go, please say aye.
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 Any nays? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Is there any other public comment? Thank you guys. You've worked so hard today. I really appreciate all of your very, very thoughtful input. Again, these recommendations are going to go to the commission on Monday afternoon for their consideration. Are there any other business or announcements? Hearing none, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.